This is not a meat and poultry problem. This is not a dairy problem. This is a food industry problem. If you think about sanitation, the slicer doesn't care if you were slicing cilantro or salami. Guess what? It still needs to get clean. So I am very pleased to see the amount of conversations that are occurring across these different sectors of the food industry, because we can and should learn from each other.
You're listening to Food Tech Talk, Supply Chain Insights from Farm to Fork, a podcast discussing the latest trends and technology in the food and supplement industries, featuring conversations with regulatory experts, quality and safety champions, and thought leaders across the industry. I'm your host, Lydia Adams. Let's jump right in. Welcome to Food Tech Talk, Supply Chain Insights from Farm to Fork. On today's episode, we're delighted to have Sharon Beals with us, a seasoned food safety and regulatory compliance executive with over 4 decades of experience shaping food safety practices across the industry. Currently serving as the food safety and regulatory executive at Beacon Point Labs, Sharon is also deeply involved in leadership roles with the American Meat Science Association and the Women's Meat Industry Network. Her commitment to mentoring future leaders and driving innovation in food safety makes her a leading voice in the field. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
I appreciate you having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dive in. But before we do, I'd love to hear more about your journey in, the food safety industry and really what initially got you into this career in the first place.
We can thank my mother, Phyllis Key, for that one. Like a lot of, kids, I knew I wanted to go to school, but didn't quite know what I was going to study. And she's like, look, you love science, you love food, how about nutrition? But I didn't want to be a dietitian. And once I got to school and realized that in order to go into nutrition research, there would be lab rats involved, I thought, so I went over to this option called foods. And it was really the best of both worlds because I got all of the food chemistry and the theory behind food and nutritional analysis, but then took some electives over in the food science department where I got some product development and things like that. So I really feel I got a great education. And I shouldn't say unfortunately, so I had all these plans. I spent a summer at the Wishbone Salad Dressing Lab in Englewood Cliffs. I thought, R&D, this is fun. This is exciting. Graduate in 1980. Wound up managing a tennis club for a few months until I found a job in the industry, which happened to be second shift QC technician in Hammond, Indiana. I grew up 20 miles from New York City. That was a bit of a culture shock to drive past Pennsylvania. But I'm so appreciative to John Butts and Bob Culler for taking a chance on this Jersey girl that knew absolutely nothing about the meat industry, didn't have any meat science classes, animal science classes, any of that stuff. But John's comment to me, you were honest and had a sense of humor. We figured we could teach you the rest.
Wow, that's fantastic. And then, I know you've held just diverse roles, in the decades that you've been doing this. How has your perspective on food safety evolved with the industry in the last, 4 decades?
Well, so starting in 1980, little tiny plant. When I think back to the things that we thought were normal, there was no raw, ready-to-eat separation as a general rule. The amount of controls that we have put in place and continue to put in place as we learn more. What we do for foreign material detection, what we do for pathogen detection, introduction of HACCP, and really focusing and leaning into continuous improvement. The bugs keep getting smarter and harder, and the detection methods keep getting more sensitive. And others are not, the latter is not a bad thing, but, outbreaks would happen in the past, and what caused it? Now we know, and we're able to target where we need to go hunt. And that's been a great tool. And it's really helped to drive a lot of this continuous improvement and changes that we've made in the industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that kind of leads us into our topic, our first question. There have been a lot of recent updates on Listeria prevention, sparking a lot of discussions within the industry. What proactive measures should food manufacturers take to align with these new notices?
But, the timing of this is really interesting because we set this up months ago. And I just came back from IPPE where we did a basic Listeria workshop that the Meat Institute sponsors. And as a group, there were 50 people attending. There were several of us instructors. It's the basics. This is not rocket science. This is get your plant clean and then operational sanitation, watch those traffic patterns, airflow, cross-contamination vectors. And if you find a positive, what are you doing to really get to the root cause and eradicate it? And the answer isn't always that it was something happened at sanitation. You get a deep-seated um, niche that's hidden. That's not your daily sanitation. You really need to break your equipment down. It's preventive maintenance, adhering to your master sanitation schedule, doing your periodic equipment and infrastructure cleaning. That was, like I said, we were all just, hey guys, back to the basics, do the basic blocking and tackling that we put in place a long time ago. You know, when I looked at the history of that workshop, it was created by the then American Meat Institute. And there were folks, like Bruce Tompkin as part of the group developing this whole curriculum. And that's where the food safety is not competitive was born out of. So, and the other thing I would add that has really been heartening to me in the last kind of like my personal focus, this is not a meat and poultry problem. This is not a dairy problem. This is a food industry problem. If you think about sanitation, the slicer doesn't care if you were slicing cilantro or salami. Guess what? It still needs to get cleaned and it still needs to get cleaned in appropriate fashion. So I am very pleased to see the amount of conversations that are occurring across these different sectors of the food industry because we can and should learn from each other.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. If we stay within our own little lanes, right, within the wider food industry, we're not sharing that information, and it's absolutely critical. So I love that. So how can companies also be able to do all the things that you mentioned? Focusing on that compliance and those basics, and then also they're trying to have operational efficiency at the same time. How do they balance that, with both of those needs?
I have a very dear friend who quotes her dad all the time. People, product, profit. You take care of your people, they take care of the product, and the profits will flow from that. It all comes down to people. We still have, in many ways, a very manual, again, meat and poultry, a very manual process. Well, produce, there's a lot of manual operations out there. Take care of those people, and they will take care of your product, and they will find the most efficient way. Again, there was another topic we talked about. We talked about management commitment, and what does that really look like? Well, it looks like being visible, and when things get brought up, you actually act on them. Nothing's worse and more disheartening than asking your employees for their input and their feedback and then not doing anything about it. They're going to quit talking to you and they're going to think that you don't care. Well, if you don't care, why should I care? So again, take care. The two things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to put it. And I mean, I think this applies to a lot of, the challenges that we face in food safety. Another one that you mentioned at the beginning was foreign material detection and prevention. Um, we know that's a persistent issue. So, what kind of advancements or strategies do you think are really most effective at minimizing risks for that?
Well, for me, farm material starts with communication and what are the requirements. Anybody that knows me knows I hate the word expectation because it's like pirate's code. It's a suggestion. Um, what are the requirements? What's your intended product use? Are you making baby food? Or are you making something for an immunocompromised group? Or are you making something that's, average, typical population? Um, Understanding what the customer's requirements are, understanding what your own process capabilities are, and then taking that same thing that we did with micro. What's your multiple hurdle approach? It starts with its specifications and then product coming in the door. And do you have screening systems? I have worked for a couple different organizations where I swear these people have 20/0 vision. They see things from, 10 feet away that normal humans can't see from like 3 inches away. Your people are so critical. I mean, things are going to happen. But as we look at the consuming public, it's further away from agriculture. You know, nobody thought twice about finding a rock in your pinto beans, back in the day, because guess what? They're grown in dirt. Now finding plastic, finding metal, finding something that is not an inherent defect, that's a different story. It's always been zero tolerance. But making sure that between the manufacturer and the purchaser and ultimately the consumer, there's a really good understanding of what the requirements are. And then looking at the technology again has gone light years, from, oh boy, we can detect something that's a quarter of an inch piece of magnetics, we're down to 0.8 millimeters. So it's just making sure you're staying on top of the technology and making sure that your technology matches what the requirements are for that type of product.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think a lot about something dear to us at Trustwell, which is supplier management and supplier relationships. How do you leverage that to get to that place of, compliance and reducing foreign material issues or any, really any food safety issue?
You've got to have that open exchange of information, not wait, something happens, pick up the phone, provide all the information. It's really frustrating up and down the food chain of, well, I purchased this on X day. Do you have a code date? No, I threw the packaging away. When there's not a whole lot of information, it's really hard to do a good investigation. So making sure you've got open communication, things are reported in a very timely fashion with as much detail as is available. And conversely, if you have something go kaflooey within your operation, be upfront and honest about it of, okay, wait a minute, we had an issue, we took control, you know, we're going to remake your product or whatever it is that we're going to do. And when you're the receiver of that information, take it in the spirit in which it's meant. I am protecting you and your brand. Don't beat me over the head with it.
Hmm. No, that's really good advice. And I think, within this industry, obviously you've been around like a lot longer than I have in this industry, but I just think that there's a lot of rapid change. And we're seeing it all over the place, regulatory, what have you. How do you advise companies, on staying connected and being informed? And how do they know, how to prepare for the future in that environment?
So trade associations. Every trade association has a regulatory person, at least all the ones I've been associated with. They stay on top of those things and they put out routine publications. Pay attention to them. Pay attention to and sign up for FDA, FSIS, the regulators. You can sign up for all of their emails of what's coming out and what's changing. But take that information back to your cross functional team and assess how that's going to impact your particular business. Some regulations may have zero impact or very little, and some may be massive. But you want to make sure that entire team, not just you, the tech person, but that entire team understands the impact. Because if it's going to require you to spend money, you, your organization, that is, then you really need that CFO on board of this is why it's critical. I haven't worked for a company yet that had an unlimited checkbook, and all those funds are typically earmarked. And if something, changes and the priorities have to change, it's really important that everybody understands why this priority has now changed and what's the return on investment in dollars and cents behind it. Because we as technical people generally do a not great job of talking about dollars and cents and return on investment. That was one of the other topics from this week is, you can see the tip of the iceberg. Those are just, okay, I'm buying something and here are the costs associated with it. But what are all those other costs, that 90% that's below the waterline? If I use a different grade of stainless, do my maintenance costs increase? Do my sanitation costs increase? Really look at the whole picture of these changes. But for me, the bottom line is making sure that You stay in touch with your trade association. You get the information straight from the regulators. You go to industry meetings. You talk it over. I mean, I had breakfast with four of my friends and colleagues, and we talked about everything from high path AI to the salmonella framework and foreign material and a few other things at breakfast the other morning, and just getting different perspectives. It's all good.
Yeah, and I think you make a really excellent point about internal operations because it definitely doesn't work to have food safety and quality kind of be sitting there alone in a silo, learning all of these things and then, not being able to communicate that. So, with a lot of the folks I talked to, we've talked about how it comes down to culture. Have you seen, how that works or what the best way to drive a food safety culture is within an organization? And what advice would you have about that internal push for food safety professionals?
If you don't have a company culture, do the right thing. So that means personal safety, continuous improvement, food safety, any of those other things. So, how you get that is you set the tone at the top. I joined Maple Leaf Foods in January of 2010. The recall happened in August of 2008. 8:30 every morning, there was a call with Michael McCain. And of all of the 20 plus odd plants, we would talk about Listeria. Somebody had just had a hit or they were waiting. The plant operations leader, not my manager. In fact, when I first started, the food safety quality managers weren't even on this call, but the plant operations leader was required to have hypotheses, what they in the plant were doing about it. And, depending upon what, we're in the process of confirmation or what they were going to be doing every day at 8:30. You set the tone at the top. You can't bring somebody into the middle and hope to drive the right behaviors upward and downward. It's just not sustainable. So, if how you get there, you got to use data, you got to use facts, you got to use dollars and cents.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. So, and another thing that you mentioned that caught my eyes, you were talking about being that technical person, being that technical expertise. Are you seeing that there's enough technical depth of expertise at the leadership level? And how can you kind of, improve that or guide that within an organization if you are that person?
There's a lot of movement in leadership roles where people that have never been in the food business have come into food companies. And using examples to help them understand why things that we're doing are critical. There was a great one given out just this week. I learned something totally new. Apparently, there are scrub pads that there's a variety of scrub pads or a brand of scrub pad. I don't know who it is, so I'm not going to throw them under the bus. But they used walnut shells in the manufacture. Now, I'm blessed that I don't have any food allergies in my family. But if you're using this walnut laden, perhaps, and you're cleaning equipment, is there any transfer onto the equipment and then maybe eventually into product? I'm also told that sometimes these types of materials are used in that pumice-like hand soap you'll find in maintenance shops. You know, making sure that we educate the people that are buying these ingredients or buying these things and all the way up to the top of here are the impacts of not doing it correctly. To me, a lot of it is just education. They just don't know, and again, talking in terms of here are the dollars, here are the cents. Here's all the recall. I mean, last the last quarter, 2 quarters of last year, I think a lot of us were going, "What in the heck just happened?" We since 2008, the last major, event, there's been a few, sporadic, small, but I asked my industry colleagues, I'm like, What do we think just happened? Because did we get lazy? Did we get complacent? Did we get what? And I got some pretty interesting comments back. One being from somebody who spends a ton of time in plants. Look around, Sharon. Everybody's under 30 or over 55. Under 30s haven't figured out yet there's an easier way to make a living. Over 55, they're hanging on to retirement. Okay. Um, from somebody I used to work with who is now not in food safety quality. I got tired of be sitting in the car in the parking lot of the restaurant by myself, handling crisis du jour, while the rest of my family is inside, have already ordered dinner, and they're banging on the window saying, "Are you done yet?" I got some mugs, t-shirts, and hats from that one myself. How do we keep the folks that have come in and are enthusiastic? How do we keep their enthusiasm? How do we keep them supported? How do we help them? Because there's a big brain drain. I shouldn't say brain drain. That yeah, not brain drain. There's a experience drain going on. You know, I grew up through BSE, PEDV, O1 E. coli 157H7 and the S-Tech sisters, Listeria rule. Now we've got the Salmonella framework. If you've not come through battle in one of these just, oh my God, now what are we going to do? Moments, um, it's hard. You got to put on that. What's put on your critical thinking cap. And, you know, I often said, if you could just bottle that near miss experience, but you'll hear companies go, it's the two worst phrases I think are, well, it's never happened here, or we've always done it that way. And so therefore, and you put the two of them together, oh my God, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I mean, and you're talking about kind of like the knowledge gaps and generational gaps and all of that. And I know you've done a lot of work with mentorship and mentoring the next generation. You know, how has that been for you, and what have you learned, and what can people do to really to just fill that gap when they're dealing with those different age groups or whatever it is, experience levels?
Well, you hear a lot of knock on younger generations. My children are 30 and 32, so I like to think that, the apples did not fall far from the tree. But I don't think it's a question of these folks don't wanna work hard and don't wanna learn. Um, but it's one thing to read about something in a book or get a lecture. So, it's the storytelling. That's one of the things we focus in on these Listeria workshops. It's the, "You're not gonna believe this, but wow." It's mind-blowing some of the some of the things that you come across. I, you have to put it in a way that will stick in people's mind when I do presentations. I usually tell the audience right from the get-go, I'm like, "Look, if I stand up here and I'm dull as dirt and I just read a bunch of, information off a bunch of slides, you're not gonna remember a darn thing I said. But if we tell some stories, if we have some fun, it's gonna stick." I had a young man that came up to me at IPPE, and he was like, "Did you remember me?" Because at the Food Safety Summit last year, he asked a question about sanitation. And I said, "Well, when was the last time you spent the night with the sanitation crew?" "Well, he's not a processor." And he was kinda like, "Well, that's not really what I do." So I looked at the audience, and I don't know, a couple 300 people in there. I said, "Okay, who in the room has spent the night with the sanitation crew?" I think it was myself, John Butts, and Tracy Fink were the only 3 hands in the air. There were a few others scattered throughout. And I thought, "Well, that's sad." So, at every conference I've attended since, the question has been asked, and not always by me, which is really kind of fun, but then I take a selfie, you know? I've gotta put up one for my PPE. The number of hands, the percentage of hands going up is increasing, which is awesome, because those are the people that if we don't start clean, we're never gonna get any better. Um, but tell those stories. bring these things to life so that they make an impact and they stick in people's brains. Like, I don't want that to happen to me. I can't let that happen to me. Otherwise, they're just words on a page and they really just don't resonate. They don't grab somebody by their heartstrings.
Yeah, no, that is really great advice, making it feel real and giving that experience.
But to go, if I may, just to go back to the mentorship piece, I mean, I've been fortunate in that I've been a mentor through not only the women mentoring platform, which we're on our second cohort, very excited about that, but the Mead Institute's young professionals. And that's why I say these folks are not, they're not afraid of hard work. They're information hungry. I get as much out of, I learn things. I hope as much as they get out of listening to this old lady talk about stuff. But it's a great exchange. And that to me is what mentoring is about. It's not just a one-way street. Because we all have plenty to learn. I mean, I like to think I'm relatively modern, but I learned how to use ChatGPT from somebody who is significantly younger than I am, and you know, it's got its uses.
Yeah. Yeah, and kinda going back to another thing you said earlier is just it's about people, it's about relationships, and, yeah, you can't really have that, transfer of knowledge and that experience if you're not focused on that part of it. Um so yeah, no, I totally agree. And, one more question, kind of related, 'cause you talked about the mentorship initiative with the women's groups you're part of. How have you seen the industry evolve in terms of diversity in leadership and women in leadership? And talk to me a little bit about that.
There's a lot of women in the technical space. We're starting to see more women in finance, marketing, operations. Oh man, we've got to get more leadership in the operations. When you look at the data, and we shared this. In fact, we've developed an ERG playbook for our membership. And Sue Schwartz from Minneapolis was funny because she's like, I'm a scientist, so I'm all about the data. And when you look, and this is published stuff, this isn't like I've made it up. Executive teams with more than 30% of women are more likely to outperform those with fewer or no women. Data fact. We make up 52% of this. It comes from McKinsey. We make up 52% of entry level positions in food and beverage manufacturing. You get to that next level manager, we drop to 40. You get to senior manager, drop to 36, VP 33, SVP 33, C-suite 20. What do we need to do to help these women, young women, or even, middle-aged women, but coming in and doing something different? How do we get them to that next level, to get to that 30+% that makes a company more profitable? I talked about having breakfast the other day with several of my friends. We were the only all-female table at breakfast at IPPE. But that's a start, because a few years ago, might not have even seen that. So we're getting there, and that's why the mission of women is so important to me, because that's what we're seeking, is to help that diversity piece. And, oh, by the way, we welcome our male allies. We have men that are members, and they're active in our mentoring platform, and that's awesome. I recruit the girl dads because they get it. Uh, I'm not saying the boy dads don't, but, um, it'll be another 300 years if we don't get our male allies to talk about us when we're not in the room, talk about our name, to not let in the meeting, Susie brings up an idea, gets bypassed, and then John brings it up 2 minutes later, and all of a sudden, it's the 2 tablets that came down from the mountain with Moses. No. "Hey, John, hold that thought. Susie, you just brought that up. Tell us more."
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I love seeing like all of the different networking groups that exist. So you're specifically, part of that women's meat industry network, right? So how can women and men, like as you said, get involved? How can they get started to join these organizations to gain that mentorship and that access to female leaders like yourself that have, that can help and can mentor them?
Women.org, www.women.org. But Melody Gee has Women in Food Safety on LinkedIn. You're right. There's a lot of different organizations. Women in Manufacturing has been around for 15 years. Um, there are a lot of different groups. You don't have to look very hard to find one. Women in Agribusiness is another one. There are Women's Food Service Forum. There are men in all of these organizations. You don't have to look very hard or very far. We're unique in that because we have very generous sponsors. We've been able to keep our membership free of cost. And so all the program we do, the mentoring platform, the webinars, um, has been because we have one, just a bunch of, if I may say the word, kick-ass volunteers who we are GSDs, if you know what that means, who roll up their sleeves and get it done. And we have very generous sponsors who recognize the value of what we bring. And that, even if we charge $50 a year, guess what? That's somebody's school lunch for their kids. Because we have maintenance supervisors, maintenance techs, flock supervisors among our membership. And we're very, proud of that fact because those are the future leaders. We've got to invest in all the levels if we're going to when we get to that parity portion.
Amazing. All right. Well, and I kind of wanted to end with a special segment that we're doing now about the food industry predictions for 2025. And obviously, we're we're in 2025. We're here in January. By the time this comes out, it'll be a little bit later than that. But what do you see as the future this year? What are the big predictions that you have for the industry?
There's a continued demand, and rightly so, of transparency from consumers. But those consumers may not understand our tech speak, right? Um, we have to think about how to communicate differently. And just a recent example. Although my husband keeps telling me I shouldn't do this, sometimes I just can't help myself. I waded into a raw milk debate on social media. There were a few of this woman, immunocompromised child, has goats, is self-pasteurizing, and had said, "Hey, I am hearing raw milk might help him. Can I would like more information." Well, there was all of the I've drunk it my entire life and never had a problem. There were those of us wading in with science and data and facts. The most effective one was a friend of mine who said, "Would you not use a seatbelt on your precious child just because no one in your family ever had an accident? Would you not have that same precious child not wear a helmet when they go skateboarding just because you've never known anybody?" Shoot, Tony Hawk wears a helmet, She decided to continue to go on pasteurizing. So there's a lot of different things that are probably going to happen in this next year, but I think it's really important to get back to good, solid communication and words that make sense and resonate with, again, this consumer just gets further and further away from the origin of food. And, there's a lot of people out there with their personal, stories. Great that's never happened to you. Awesome. But how awful would you feel if that young child, because never happened to you, something happened to that child? I wouldn't be able to live with myself. Uh, but we have to learn how to put words and put things into words and communicate in an effective manner. And it's not always the data and the facts.
Right, right. Like we know the data and we know the facts. It's being able to then navigate through those conversations to meet them where they are and to fulfill the need the consumers have and the demands that they have. But yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really, really interesting point. Any final thoughts for us before we close? This has been a really great experience talking to you, and just I've learned so much. But anything else you want to share that we haven't talked about?
There's an awful lot going. You don't know what's going on in somebody's personal life. You really don't know. So little grace, little space. Be kind. Choose to be fabulous, because you get to make that decision. And because that was what Viktor Frankl said. You choose. You control how you respond to the stimulus. So choose to be fabulous and choose to be kind. Those are my parting words.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Like I said, this has just been awesome, and I know our listeners appreciate it as well. So thank you, and hope to see you again soon.
You bet. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another bite-sized nugget of food tech talk, supply chain insights from farm to fork. To learn more about Trustwell and its technology platform that connects product formulation, nutrition analysis, and compliant labeling with traceability, recall readiness, and supply chain transparency, please visit www.trustwell.com. Thanks for listening.